The South China Sea once trembled at the sound of her name. She commanded over 80,000 pirates, a fleet so vast it dwarfed the combined naval forces of Britain, Spain, and China. Her ships flew crimson banners that struck terror into merchants and emperors alike. Most believe piracy was a man's world, chaotic, brutal, and fleeting. A place where power was seized through violence, and women were little more than captives or cargo. But in the early 19th century, one woman didn't just survive this world. She ruled it. Her name was Ching Shih, and she turned the lawless tides of piracy into a disciplined empire. An empire so formidable that 3 of the world's great powers declared war to bring her down, and failed. How did a former prostitute rise to command the greatest pirate fleet in history? What strange forces, human or otherwise, allowed her to outmaneuver the navies of entire empires? And why, after years of dominance, did she vanish from the seas without a single shot fired? This is the story of the pirate queen who bent chaos to her will, and left behind a mystery as deep as the waters she once ruled. But her greatest act of piracy wasn't on the sea. It happened on land. The South China Sea was alive with motion. Junks drifted lazily across jade-green waters, their sails taut against the warm monsoon winds. In the harbours, merchants barked prices over the din of clattering carts and bleating livestock. Canton's waterfront seethed with life, a tangle of foreign tongues, lacquered wood hulls, and smoke rising from sizzling street stalls. But in the floating brothels, moored just beyond the city's clamour, the world slowed to a whisper. Lanterns swayed softly above the dark waters. Laughter drifted like smoke, curling through the humid night air. Inside, foreign merchants huddled around polished tables, gambling away fortunes with hands slick from rice wine and opium. Gold coins clinked in shallow bowls. The sweet scent of roasted duck mingled with the sharper tang of salt and sweat. Sailors, their voices hoarse from weeks at sea, spoke of strange things. Red sails glimpsed at dawn, vanishing like ghosts. In this world of luxury and danger, a woman called Shi Xianggu, later known as Ching Shih, moved silently between the tables. Her eyes were quick and calculating. She knew which touch would loosen a man's tongue, which word would make him laugh, and which question would yield a secret worth more than silver. For her, every drunken whisper was a map, every careless boast a thread in the great web of power stretching across the South China Sea. She was clever in a way that unsettled even her fellow courtesans. Where others saw a gilded cage, she saw opportunity. Each night, she watched the harbour lanterns flicker, her mind turning over the same questions. Who ruled these waters? And more importantly, how could she ever claim them as her own? It was during one of these nights that she met Zheng Yi, a pirate captain whose reputation preceded him. Zheng Yi commanded a formidable fleet but sought more. More ships, more men, more fear in the hearts of merchants and mandarins alike. He had come to the brothel for pleasure, but when his eyes met hers, something shifted. She smiled, not with seduction, but with calculation. Here was a man hungry for power, and she knew how to feed that hunger. Zheng Yi offered her a place at his side, a partnership sealed not with passion, but with a shared vision. Together, they could dominate the South China Sea. But even as she accepted, she planned further ahead. Where Zheng Yi saw power, she saw an empire, and she intended to rule it. For now, she played the role of partner, learning the intricacies of pirate politics, the rival factions, the fragile alliances, the codes of loyalty that bound men to their captains. She observed Zheng Yi's methods and whispered suggestions in his ear, her influence growing with each victory. Under their joint command, The Red Flag fleet swelled to hundreds of ships, its crimson banners striking terror into every port from Canton to Vietnam. But in a world where loyalty was as fickle as the tides, nothing lasted forever. When Zheng Yi's sudden death left a power vacuum, the sharks had scented blood, and all expected to feast on Zheng Yi's legacy. No one expected the quiet woman who had entered their world as a courtesan to make her move. But while the captains sharpened their blades for a fight, Ching Shih sharpened her plan. The move she made next wouldn't just seize power, it would rewrite the rules of piracy itself. For years, Zheng Yi's cunning and force had bound together rival pirate clans under a single crimson banner. Now, with his sudden death, the fleet drifted. Not on the waves, but in a storm of ambition. The storm that claimed Zheng Yi tore more than sails from masts. It shattered the fragile balance of power within the Red Flag fleet. As his body slipped into the churning sea, 100 captains watched in silence. Grief flickered in their eyes, but it didn't last. In its place came quiet ambition, sharp and dangerous as drawn blades. In the days following, factions circled like sharks, each eager to seize the throne of the pirate empire. Old grudges resurfaced. Whispered promises of gold and command passed between captains in the darkness. Some argued the fleet should split, each man taking his share and sailing for his own fortunes. Others plotted to become the sole ruler, imagining themselves in Zheng Yi's place. But before any could strike, one voice rose, not with anger or desperation, but with calm authority. It was Ching Shih. The courtesan turned consort stood before the gathered captains with her husband's adoptive son, Chung Po Tsai, at her side. Their alliance stunned the fleet. Chung, young and ambitious, provided the loyalty of Zheng Yi's inner circle. Ching Shih provided something more, an iron will and a mind sharpened by years of observing men's desires and weaknesses. In one audacious move, she secured her position as leader. Those who questioned her authority soon discovered the cost of dissent. She did not rule with brutality alone, though there was no shortage of it in her reign. Her genius lay in order. She implemented a pirate code so strict it turned chaos into cohesion. Any pirate who disobeyed orders was executed on the spot. Theft of treasure from the fleet's collective stores meant immediate death. Deserters, if caught, were punished by severing an ear to mark them before execution. Women taken captive were to be treated with respect. Rape was punishable by death. And it worked. A horde of cutthroats became a navy. 1,800 ships, 80,000 pirates, and Ching Shih ruled them all. Merchants paid tribute rather than risking capture. Entire coastal villages bent the knee to her emissaries before a single cannon fired. But it wasn't just local fishermen and traders who felt her power. China's imperial navy, sent to crush her, was decimated. European powers, their warships bristling with guns, found themselves outmaneuvered and humiliated by her junk fleets. Ching Shih's pirates moved like smoke across the water, vanishing into hidden bays, reappearing with devastating force. Even her enemies began to whisper her name with reverence and fear. But power breeds resentment. Beneath the surface of her vast empire, rivalries festered. Captains grumbled at her iron discipline. Imperial officials schemed in candlelit rooms. And in far-off ports, European admirals swore oaths to bring down the pirate queen. As her power swelled, so too did the storm clouds. Unity breeds enemies, and across the seas, forces were already gathering, plotting the impossible, the end of the pirate queen. To outsiders, it seemed impossible. How could one woman, once a brothel girl, command 80,000 pirates, men forged in blood and bound by no law but greed? Yet Ching Shih's grip on her empire was absolute, her authority unquestioned. To understand her power is to step into a strange and layered world where discipline met myth and terror turned to loyalty. Her pirate code became legend. It was not simply law, it was a system of rewards and punishments so severe that it bound even the most ruthless cutthroats to her will. Defiance meant instant death. A captain caught hiding plunder was beheaded on the deck of his own ship, his severed head displayed as a warning. But loyalty was rewarded beyond measure. A pirate who captured a valuable vessel and handed all treasure to the fleet could expect gold, land, and a share of power. Fear held her empire together, but it was not fear alone. Stories spread like wildfire among her men, stories that Ching Shih was more than mortal. Some whispered that she had made secret pacts with spirits of the sea, that the souls of drowned sailors answered her call. On storm-tossed nights, pirates claimed to see ghostly lights hovering above her flagship, and rival fleets spoke in hushed tones of how she could summon tempests to drag enemy ships beneath the waves. But whispers of magic weren't discouraged. They were cultivated. Ching Shih understood the power of myth. It was as sharp a weapon as any blade. While others relied on brute force, she maneuvered with precision. Rival pirate lords were not destroyed outright. Instead, she divided their loyalties, offering terms so generous that even enemies bent the knee. Those who refused found themselves isolated, their fleets picked apart like carrion. In her hands, alliances became chains. Captains who swore fealty were granted ships, crews, and safe harbors, but also held to strict obligations. They were tied to her by wealth and fear, unable to break free without risking annihilation. Even the Qing imperial officials could scarcely comprehend her. Reports sent to Beijing spoke of a woman whose fleets were larger than entire provincial navies. They described her not as a pirate, but as a sovereign ruler, issuing decrees from her flagship as though it were a floating court. Diplomats debated whether she should be addressed as a criminal or a warlord. Her presence was unsettling. She was neither noble-born nor male, yet she carried herself with a calm authority that silenced rooms. Foreign observers noted how she rarely raised her voice. Orders were delivered quietly, almost gently, but they were obeyed without question. Yet beneath the surface of her empire, cracks began to form. Some captains grumbled at her discipline. Others feared the growing power of Chung Po Tsai, her ally and rumored lover. Foreign navies plotted in distant ports, seeking ways to drive a wedge between her and her lieutenants. But Ching Shih stayed several steps ahead. Rival factions fell not to cannon fire, but to cunning. Imperial spies sent to sow discord were captured and turned into double agents. Pirates tempted to rebellion found themselves surrounded before they could act. Their ships burned to ash. Still, her enemies were learning. And as her fleet grew larger and her name more feared, the South China Sea began to feel too small for so many ambitions. Her boldest move wouldn't come with cannon fire, but with words sharp enough to unmake empires. As the years passed, Ching Shih's red sails seemed to cover the entire South China Sea. Her empire reached its zenith. 1,800 ships prowled the waters. 80,000 pirates collected tribute from trembling merchants, and even Qing officials sent envoys to negotiate safe passage. It seemed unshakable. But empires, especially those built on fear, are fragile things. It began as a murmur. Whispers spread through the fleet. Some lieutenants grew restless under her iron discipline. Captains once loyal now questioned her judgment in darkened cabins. Chung Po Tsai, her trusted ally and partner, strained to keep the younger pirates in line. Holding together the largest pirate confederacy in history was like gripping water. It slipped through her fingers, even as she tightened her grasp. At the same time, her enemies gathered strength. The Qing dynasty, humiliated by her victories, resolved to crush her reign once and for all. They unleashed their full naval might, commissioning warships and recruiting seasoned admirals. But they weren't alone. European powers, Britain, Portugal, furious at the Red Flag Fleet's chokehold on trade, joined the hunt. Together they formed a coalition of firepower larger than any force Ching Shih had ever faced. From the rocky coastlines of Guangdong to the deep waters off Hainan, her fleet was hunted, cornered, and driven into retreat. For the first time in years, her pirates tasted fear. And yet, she did not die in battle. She did not vanish into the mists, as later legends would claim. Instead, she made a move so audacious, it stunned the world. Ching Shih sailed directly into the heart of enemy power. Flying white banners of truce, her flagship anchored in a Qing naval port. Officials waited on the docks, expecting a desperate fugitive to beg for mercy. But when Ching Shih stepped ashore, she wasn't the image of defeat. She walked with calm authority, her silks immaculate, her gaze steady. She came not to surrender, but to negotiate. In a series of tense meetings, Ching Shih offered to disband her fleet on one condition: full amnesty for her and all her pirates. No trials, no executions, no confiscation of treasure. She and her men would walk free, their fortunes untouched. The Qing officials balked, but they knew the alternative: years of bloodshed, more humiliation, more losses to a woman who had already defied them for over a decade. In the end, the empire agreed. And so, Ching Shih, the most powerful pirate in history, surrendered not in chains, but with her wealth intact and her dignity unbroken. She retired to Canton, opened a gambling house, and lived out her days in peace. It was, perhaps, her greatest heist. Not gold, not ships, but freedom itself. But was this surrender, or her final act of dominance? When Ching Shih walked away from the sea, the world expected her to fade into history's margins. A footnote in the Qing dynasty's struggle for control. But she didn't disappear. Instead, she did something few figures of her scale have ever done. She reinvented herself entirely. In Canton, she exchanged her crimson banners for silk robes and her command deck for the polished tables of a gambling house. With the same discipline that once ruled thousands of pirates, she built her new business into a quiet empire. Merchants, officials, and travelers alike gathered in her halls, unaware, or perhaps unwilling to acknowledge, that their host had once terrorized the very trade routes they now traversed. Ching Shih married again, this time to Chung Po Tsai, her former ally and Zheng Yi's adopted son. Together they raised a family, their children growing up in a home filled not with plunder and violence, but with wealth earned in legitimate trade. For years she lived quietly, her past as the world's most feared pirate softening into legend. And yet, the ripples of her actions never stilled. The Red Flag Fleet dissolved without her guiding hand. Some captains tried to carve out their own domains, but none matched her brilliance or her ability to hold such a vast and volatile alliance together. Slowly, the South China Sea quieted. The once feared crimson sails vanished from the horizon, replaced by merchant junks and imperial patrols. But Ching Shih's name lingered in whispers and stories. Fishermen spoke of her cunning and discipline, merchants of her terrifying efficiency. In distant lands, European sailors recalled her as the woman who had defied empires and walked away unscathed. Over generations, her tale grew larger, shifting from history into myth. For some, she became a symbol of ruthless ambition. For others, a rare example of power that did not end in betrayal or blood. Historians still debate her legacy. Was she a criminal mastermind or a proto-feminist icon? A tyrant or a tactician? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. As the South China Sea settled into peace, her story refused to do the same. It echoed in the waves, in the winds that once carried her fleets, in the quiet acknowledgement that not all power ends in chains or blood. Perhaps her greatest act wasn't piracy, but escape. A woman who built an empire on the sea and stepped off it without a single chain. The South China Sea lies still, its waters a mirror of the skies above. But if you listen closely, there's a hum beneath the surface, a memory carried on the tides. Some say it's the whisper of sails, the faint creak of wooden hulls moving as one. Others say it's her name, spoken not by voices, but by the waves themselves. Ching Shih left no monuments. There are no grand statues of her in Canton, no imperial scrolls honoring her reign. Her power wasn't meant for the records of kings. It lived in the hearts of 80,000 men who once bowed to her command. And in the fear, she struck into the navies of empires. Her story passed from lips to ears, reshaped with every telling, until history and legend became impossible to separate. She didn't fall to betrayal or blade. She didn't die in battle. Her power didn't drain away. It transformed. In stepping off the deck of her flagship and into the quiet streets of Canton, she achieved what no pirate before or after could claim: a clean escape. Historians argue whether her brilliance lay in strategy, ruthlessness, or sheer luck, but perhaps her true genius was knowing when to let go. The Red Flag Fleet dissolved. The South China Sea settled. Yet her presence lingers in the mist that clings to the waters at dawn, in the creak of ships rocking gently in the harbours she once controlled. Not all power ends in chains or bloodshed. Some ends in a whisper so deep even empires cannot erase it. And still, the South China Sea murmurs her name. Thank you for walking this gentle path through history. I'll see you next time.